Good afternoon, everyone. Welcome to Virtual Ability. My name is Auntie, but I prefer Gigi. I live on the west coast of the USA. I have aphasia and some cognitive issues from a TBI. And my favorite things to do in Second Life is attending conferences like this one, hunts, and big shopping events. I also work in Second Life as a general manager of a ballroom. Please welcome our next speaker, Pamela N. Romero Villa, who is a postdoctoral associate at Washington University in St. Louis, USA. She will be sharing her findings and statistics on genetic correlations with mental and physical health traits pertaining to chronic pain. Please hold comments and questions until the end of her presentation. Thank you.
Hello, can people hear me? Okay, perfect. Thank you for your patience. Thank you for the introduction. As Gigi mentioned, my name is Pamela, and today I'd like to present my talk that I titled based on a similar movie, if you've watched it, called Everything Everywhere All at Once, because when I talk to patients, that's kind of how their experience of chronic pain is. That's how they described it, is everything's happening everywhere and all at once. And I'm here to present on how genetics can helps explain why chronic pain is often co-occurs with other physical and mental health disorders. So first, I'd like to take a step back and think about why this work matters. So I'd like to introduce you to my friend and collaborator, Abby. Abby has suffered from chronic pain for over a decade, has been diagnosed with 3 immune disorders, and works with me as a advisor from the chronic pain community on my research in a role that we call people with lived experience. So she advises on my work, she gives me feedback, and as researchers, we're trying to make a push into having people from the community be directly influencing the research as it's happening. So I would recommend you going to the United States Association for the Study of Pain, or USASP, to learn more about how you can also get involved in your community and the research happening around your community. So the big picture problem is that chronic pain often occurs with a variety of disorders. In fact, more than half of people with an immune disorder, for example, also suffer from chronic pain. And patients with chronic pain, similarly, around half also suffer from a mental health condition such as depression or anxiety. So my research question so far has been, as a geneticist, can shared genetic factors help explain why chronic pain occurs so frequently with other disorders, including focus on immune disorders and mental health disorders for this talk. So if you were to think about a map, my interests with this research is trying to quantify how close biologically chronic pain is with immune disorders or the immune system and mental health disorders. But let's describe each of them first. So chronic pain is typically defined as pain that lasts 3 or more months. It varies a lot based on its source, so its location, and other aspects. And how it's classified. It's also fairly common. So around the world, 20% of the worldwide population suffers from chronic pain. So for mental health conditions, they're usually defined as a medical condition that affects a person's thinking, mood, or behavior. They can vary widely. The most common ones that people know are depression and anxiety, and those are often the most common with chronic pain as well. My focus in my research is often focused on a similarly related mental health disorder, which is substance use disorder, commonly known as addiction. And examples of these are alcohol use disorder or opioid use disorder, which obviously its intersection with chronic pain with the opioid epidemic got a lot of interest in the last few decades. Immune disorders, on the other hand, occur when the body's immune system acts abnormally and often impairing other functions. There's 3 different types, 2 of which I will focus on for this talk. Autoimmune disorders is when the immune system is attacking itself or its own body. Allergic disorders are when your immune system is overly activated. So you can think about it as when you break into hives from being stung by a bee instead of just getting inflammation on that site. And then immunodeficient is kind of the opposite, where your immune system is a little bit toned down and not working as actively as it should. So first, I'll describe the work that I have been recently completed, which is a genome-wide association study of chronic pain. For this study, I used the All of Us research program, which is a biomedical biobank in the United States, where anyone over the age of 18 across the United States can volunteer to participate. It's getting close to 1 million individuals. You complete a few surveys, you can link your electronic health records, and also donate your DNA. So I encourage people to go visit it if they want to participate and volunteer in research. For our measures, we use the electronic health records data to define chronic pain, and then we use the genetic data to see if there are genetic factors in the genome associated with chronic pain. So for our method, if you think again about looking at things in terms of a map, we are trying to do a hypothesis-free or without any assumptions investigation across the whole genome to try to find areas of the genome that stand out as being more commonly present in people with chronic pain than people without chronic pain. So if you were to look down, say you were a satellite and you were looking down on the Earth, where would you find kind of mountains of elevation that kind of bring your eye? This is kind of what we're doing in this method, is we're trying to find what areas of the genome should we look further for variants that might be implicated in chronic pain. So here's a breakdown of our sample sizes. I mention it, I show them here because our study is the most genetically diverse study of chronic pain in civilian populations. My colleague Sylvanus Toikumo did another great study of chronic pain in veteran populations that was also very genetically diverse. This is the most diverse study in non-veteran populations of chronic pain. So if you think again about that large sweep, here each on the x-axis we have our chromosome number, so humans have 23 chromosomes. And then on the y-axis is how significant a variant is, and then each one of these dots is a genetic variant. So then we're trying to find, across, doing a whole scoop, what areas of the genome should follow-up analyses or studies focus on that might harbor some genetic variation that's important for chronic pain. And in this study, we found one significant region of the genome in chromosome 3 that was associated or seen more frequently in people with chronic pain than people without chronic pain. This is a non-coding part of the genome, but it has been previously associated with other mental health disorders and neurological conditions such as bipolar, depression, and schizophrenia. So then we can take our findings to try to put it in context with other conditions. So to do this, we focused on a subset to be able to compare apples to apples. So the European subsample, which was the largest in our case, and we downloaded other past studies of mental health disorders and immune traits, and we used a method called LDSC and genomic sum that basically models how genetically similar our chronic pain genetic study is to other studies with other traits or conditions. So if we see here, on the x-axis we have the correlation, 1 being a perfect overlap, 0 being there's no overlap in the genetic factors between chronic pain and whatever other traits we're looking at. And then on the y-axis, which might be hard to read, are a variety of different traits. So first, we compared our study with past studies of chronic pain, and we see that it's a nice sanity check, and it's great when things are converging. We see that our chronic pain study is very highly genetically related or overlapping with past studies of chronic pain in the past. So the correlations range from 0.8 to 0.9, which is really high. Then, for the interest of this talk, we looked at a variety of mental health conditions, and we found a moderate to high genetic correlation or overlap between our study of chronic pain and a variety of mental health conditions, the highest being anxiety and depression, followed by post-traumatic stress disorder. And again, as you have heard throughout this talk, there's a big overlap in what clinicians see between chronic pain and these disorders. And we validate this genetically or biologically with our study here. Next, and again, interest in this subset of psychiatric disorders for my research is addiction. So we also saw a moderate genetic overlap between the genetic factors that influence chronic pain and those that also influence addiction of around 0.4, the highest being for opioid use disorder, which again, if you follow the literature or what's going on, that kind of tracks. And then tobacco use disorder. And then we see things a little bit all over the place when we're trying to look at other traits, such as like BMI, cognitive skills, etc. suggesting again that these are a little bit more nuanced relationships. Okay, now that you guys are genetics experts, I'll get you into a little bit more deeper models that we did to tease apart these relationships further. So this is a genomic SEM model, and essentially what we're doing is we're taking, so in the past plot I showed you guys, we were looking at individual pairs of relationships. So chronic pain, opioid use disorder, chronic pain, anxiety. In this model, we can actually collapse these together. So we put all of these addiction disorders together into a single factor, denoted in the blue, the addiction risk factor, to try to see, okay, what is the relationship between all of these together and chronic pain? So the way to think about it, if I were to go at the grocery store, would be, let's gather all of the vegetables and let's see how the vegetables together, instead of looking at just carrots or onion, or sorry, I'm blanking on vegetables now, or broccoli or whatever, let's look at all of the vegetables together and see how they influence something of interest, which in this case would be chronic pain. So we put also together my chronic pain study with past studies of chronic pain into this chronic pain factor, and then we can model, okay, let's look at broadly how addiction and chronic pain genetically are related. And we see that they are the relationship goes up. So essentially, when you look at these factors together, the relationship actually becomes a little bit stronger at like 0.41, suggesting that around 40% of the genetic factors that influence chronic pain also influence addiction. The cool thing about this model is that we can still look at individual relationships after conditioning for that general addiction risk or predisposition. So I cut some of them here for time, but we looked at all of these individual relationships for individual disorders, so cannabis, opioids, etc. And we found 2 individual relationships that remain significant or important after conditioning on that general predisposition for addiction. And that was problematic alcohol use or alcohol use disorder, which interestingly enough, after conditioning for that generalized addiction risk, that relationship actually went negative, something that we weren't seeing in the past models. And then the next one was tobacco use disorder, which remained significant after controlling for that general addiction risk, suggesting that there are specific genetic variants that influence the tobacco use disorder chronic pain relationship independent of a general predisposition for addiction. So to summarize, looking at the genetic overlap between chronic pain and substance use disorders, we found that most of that relationship was driven by a general predisposition for addiction. However, we still found that there were some substances that had significant independent effects, and these were actually contrary effects once you control for that addiction risk, a negative relationship for problematic alcohol use, and then a positive one for tobacco use disorder. And importantly for clinicians and other policymakers and stuff, after conditioning for that general liability for addiction, the opioid use disorder risk was non-significant, suggesting that most of the variant genetic factors that are influencing chronic pain and opioid use disorder are just shared by addiction risk liability in general. It's not specific to opioid use. So moving to a different world, let's look at physical health disorders, specifically immune disorders. So we did a similar study here with immune disorders, and I'm just showing you the takeaway, which I know this plot is overwhelming. But we found, again, that assumption-free inspection of these relationships, so hypothesis-free. We broadly see five factors or groupings when we look at a variety of different chronic pain and immune traits. So let's go into each of them first. So the first factor I just call autoimmune diseases. Again, autoimmune disease is where your immune system is attacking itself or its own body. So we see that psoriasis, myasthenia gravis, lupus, type 1 diabetes, celiac, and Addison's disease all group into this one specific factor genetically, suggesting that there are similar genetic or biological factors influencing this specific group of traits. The second factor is related to inflammation. So it's inflammatory diseases of joints and digestive tract. And this is juvenile idiopathic arthritis, Crohn's disease, and ulcerative colitis. Interestingly enough, we saw that chronic pain and inflammation markers collapsed into a single factor or grouping. So this is C-reactive protein, IL-6, which you might have seen when you get labs done by your PCP, musculoskeletal pain, chronic pain, general pain, and multi-site chronic pain, which is a measure of how many different parts of your body do you feel pain in. So this was the biggest surprise, is that these body-wide inflammation markers were very tightly related to chronic pain and pain traits into one factor. The fourth factor was inflammatory disease from an overly activated immune system. So this is esophageal counts, atopic dermatitis, allergies, and asthma. Again, when your body has a little bit of an overreaction to a stimulus or something like that. And then the fifth factor was just white blood cell counts. So again, theoretically, these factors kind of make sense. The biggest surprise being the fact that chronic pain and body and inflammation were very tightly packed together. And this aligns with the theory or idea that chronic pain is an immune disorder in and of itself, because chronic pain often happens when you are still feeling pain from something that has maybe healed already, like if you were in a surgery or something like that. So this lends a little bit of credence to that theory, although again, chronic pain is complex. I'm not saying that this single theory explains all of it. So we can again kind of collapse all of these related diseases into a single factor, like the joint and digestive system factor, to see how they're related to chronic pain broadly. And we see a positive, moderate of like 0.29 relationship between chronic pain and joint and digestive disease. But that model, in this model, we were, again, based on those factor analyses, we were combining chronic pain with the inflammation markers, but the model wasn't fitting quite well, indicative that like, hey, you're kind of grouping things together that maybe should be teased apart. So we did that here, and we took out those inflammation markers into their own little factor in the orange, chronic pain being in red, and then the other diseases being in yellow here. And we see a positive relationship between all of these factors. So between inflammation and allergic diseases, inflammation and chronic pain and allergic diseases. And this is in line with what I've seen, again, working with these research ambassadors and people with lived experience that often complain about eczema and allergic diseases in addition to their chronic pain. And you can see the same here. So in summary, when we're looking at the relationship between chronic pain and immune disorders, we see that chronic pain is consistently genetically related or overlapping with inflammation markers, so much so that in some of our analyses, it was suggested that they were a single cluster. But there were some nuances. So there were some positive relationships where, meaning that there was an overlap in the genetic variants were influencing both traits in the similar direction. Or there were some negative relationships, like with joint and digestive disease, where maybe the genetic factors were influencing both chronic pain and a digestive disorder, but were having different effects on each. So for some main takeaways, so in summary, when we're trying to look at all of these together, there's a high genetic overlap between chronic pain and mental health disorders, and there's significant overlap between chronic pain and immune disorders, but there are a lot of nuances, and these relationships need to be dissected further to understand what is the relationship between them. On the mental health disorder side, here are some practical takeaways. Chronic pain, as you've heard throughout all of these talks, chronic pain and mental health disorders often happen together. Genetics partially explains why, because biologically, there might be similar biological pathways or factors influencing both conditions. But chronic pain itself is not a mental health disorder. It's a biologically distinct condition, and I say that to mean I often hear from my research ambassadors complain about people, especially in the medical field, telling them it's all in your head. This is just depression. This is just anxiety. This is not how you feel. That's not true. These are, even biologically, they're distinct disorders. They're just influenced by similar biological pathways, which can help explain why, one, they often co-occur together, and then two, why having one might predispose you to the other. So to my clinicians and patients in the audience, I would encourage you to consider the importance of addressing the often hidden consequences of chronic pain, such as the isolation, social isolation, the depression and anxiety that can come from experiencing chronic pain all the time, or the anxiety that comes from my patients with chronic migraines of anticipating when the next migraine is going to come. These are real things that have to be treated in addition to treating the underlying chronic pain that the patient is feeling. And everything you're feeling is valid. Again, everything, everywhere, all at once. On the physical health disorder side and the immune disorder side, my takeaways would be that, interestingly, chronic pain and immune disease often co-occur together. We actually see this more often in females than males. There's a bunch of theories about why that I'm very curious and curiously digging through right now. And again, similar to the mental health disorders, genetics partially helps explain this. chronic pain was genetically related to highly genetically related to inflammation, as we saw in that factor that put the inflammation markers and chronic pain together. And it's important for developing future treatments to identify areas of the genome that are driving these relationships, so we can develop treatments that target both. And again, to my clinicians and patients in the audience, I would, when chronic pain persists and it seems unexplainable, I would consider test or encourage testing for immune disorders, simply to rule out some possible relationships there. I'll quickly touch on some future research that I'm looking into, working on. And one of them is that I'm very passionate about is drug repurposing analyses. So we know that developing drugs for treating disease can be a very costly and time-consuming endeavor, and that patients need help now. So a very cool set of analyses that I'm looking forward to doing is we can take drugs that have already been cleared by, say, the FDA, the Federal Drug Administration, and see if we can repurpose them or use them for another condition that they haven't been cleared for yet. So with genetics, we can try to identify, we can try to see if if you remember the peaks again from that plot, if those peaks from chronic pain are similar to, or in similar regions as the drug targets from already prescribed or accepted medication, to see whether those medications could be repurposed for chronic pain or immune disorders. So that's kind of what I'm working on now with my chronic pain and immune disorders, is trying to find drugs that might be repurposed for treating these conditions, and as well as identifying new drug targets that maybe there's not a pre-approved drug now that future pharmacological studies could look into further to develop novel treatments. With that, I would like to acknowledge and give a big thank you to everyone in the All of Us research team and its participants. The All of Us research program, again, just another plug, they're doing great work, and it's open to researchers across the world to speed research and to make sure that it's also equitable. So they also try to oversample people that have been historically underrepresented in research. And I know that Virtual Ability is very passionate about that here. And as well as I would like to thank my collaborators and my fellowship. And my email is on the top of that slide in case you'd like to email me further and connect with me. And with that, I will open up for questions. Thank you very much. Yeah, great question. And I can say this on the US side, and I think the rest of the world is moving similarly. In the past, we've been trying to do a big push for just recruiting people from diverse backgrounds for research, but we've realized that we're often missing a lot by not including them in the design of the research itself. So this has been, as a geneticist, for example, it's not common for people to include research participants and people with lived experience in their research. And I can personally tell you that I've learned a lot. I mean, Abby was able to give context to, for example, her experience of suffering from chronic pain and all of these like eczema and stuff like that. she was actually able to also mention a lot of immune disorders that I was not aware of that often co-occur with chronic pain, and add traits to the things that we're actually rerunning analyses based on her feedback now, to include a lot of these things. And it's also kind of important to, it also influences a lot how I present this research. Like, for example, that's why I emphasize a lot, like, even if chronic pain and anxiety or depression often co-occur together, they are distinct entities. Advocate for yourself. Uh, because working with Abby and other people, I often hear a lot about how they are gaslit and not heard, or just told it's in your head. And even if pain is a experience that of course we experience in our brain, I think genetics shows that it's both similar but distinct from mental health disorders. And that's something you can take to your doctor and be like, I know better. It's not just in my head. These are distinct uh, conditions.
Mook had a question too. Mook asked, thanks for highlighting the high genetic correlation between chronic pain, anxiety, and addiction. Sorry to flog the correlationist causation theory. Can you tell us more about the actual causal direction here? For instance, does the genetic risk for anxiety actively drive chronic pain? Or is there a shared underlying genetic factor that independently triggers both everywhere all at once? How would you track down a causal direction? Is that part of your future research?
Yeah, that's a great question. Not shown here, but I am working on some. So you are correct that correlation does not equal causation. So these are correlation analyses that only look at the overlap, but um, they can't assume causation. So I'm not implying that one causes the other with this. I'm just looking at how similar genetic factors might influence both. But there are some causation analyses that we're able to do in the field of genetics that I'm very interested in doing for this project. Some of them are called Mendelian randomization or twin analyses, to see when is it more common that you get anxiety or depression first and then chronic pain, or vice versa. My colleague Zeal in my in the research lab I work at is actually doing some of those analyses with suicide behaviors, which is thoughts of self-harm, attempts at self-harm, and so forth, with chronic pain. And she has been finding uh, preliminary as well, or I'll say that, I'll caveat it. But her findings so far are that chronic pain is more causally related to suicidality than vice versa. So chronic pain tends to happen first and lead to suicidality than the other way around. Of course, that I think that often makes like intuitive sense for people, but it's very important to show this objectively with data, so then we know um, when we should target people for interventions. One of my future um, research studies will look at how long is it that people are in chronic pain before they start having these suicidal behaviors. So can we kind of start thinking about, okay, this person has been in chronic pain for 10 years. We should really think about prioritizing them for intervention. But I have not been able to get to those studies yet, but you make a very good point. Thank you.
Mook is reminding us that the treatment plan works best when a causal direction can be identified?
Right, I agree. I think it's hard because when all of these causal analyses, they are broadly looking at what is the most common causal pathway across groups, right? So it's kind of like I can give guidance to doctors of, hey, this is the most likely pattern where chronic pain happens first and then suicidality, but it'll vary across individuals a lot. So it'll also I also you know leave it to clinicians and doctors and mental health experts to deal with the individual patient best because they know their story best and their trajectory.
Roxy asks, what kind of intervention?
For what kind of interventions? I am not a clinician, so I will give a big caveat, but we can, put people into, or encourage people to seek mental health treatment when they're going through chronic pain and they seem at high risk for suicidal behaviors. We can do some check-ins. But again, that's kind of the end of my expertise there, since I'm not a clinician and I'm not in the clinic myself.
Gentle asks, what are mental health professionals taught about pain? And what are pain doctors taught about mental health issues, other than the danger of over-prescribing narcotics for pain relief?
I love that question. I was recently in a clinician mostly driven chronic pain conference, and I was surprised that not a lot of clinicians are taught about chronic pain or pain itself and how it's felt, and the fact that it's a both physical and a mental condition. And vice versa, doctors that are treating your pain often kind of stick to their lane and don't think about the far-ranging aspects or impacts of chronic pain in people's lives. I think that we need a lot more work to teach clinicians and medical practitioners about both. And I think chronic pain, one of the reasons I love studying chronic pain is that it's both, right? It influences both. You feel it both ways, both physically and mentally. And it kind of, and I think clinicians and medical providers should similarly try to learn to navigate both and see it as the complex condition that it is. So we can again target these things early instead of waiting until they get very bad. Um, there's been studies that show that social interaction, like Second Life, helps not just decrease the isolating effects of chronic pain, but social interaction itself helps with the management of chronic pain. So I think that when clinicians start taking that multidisciplinary approach, patients will be better for it.
And Roxy comments, teach the doctors to stop going for the low-hanging fruit. For years they said I had gout when it was deeper than that.
Yeah, I think that's the other thing is, and I refer to like my collaborator, Abby, and the person with lived experience is, they had to advocate a lot to get tested for more things. And sometimes doctors just look at, a very stereotypical set of tests and stop at that.
And Bill comments, it helps some with depression too, since I'm an introvert.
Yeah, no, I agree. it's a very helpful environment when you get also, I don't know, thinking from experience, when you get overwhelmed by a very loud or like a lot of sounds or noises or lights. So it's a very nice environment where you can take a step back when you need it. Um, any other questions?
As Kay says, the low-hanging fruit reference gets me thinking about how many doctors are so limited in the amount of time they can spend with their patients due to requirements by insurance companies. Their facilities where they work, the paperwork they do, they are under pressure to solve their patients' issues as quickly as they can, while also doing no harm, quote unquote. And also keeping up on the latest studies findings.
Yeah, yeah, it's a lot. That would be a policy implementation research about how to improve the medical healthcare system, and that is beyond my expertise to comment on here. But I definitely have felt it myself, and it's very frustrating. Oh, yeah, fair enough.
Gentle asks, do any of us in the audience have experience with either chronic pain or mental health issues running in families? Would that sort of thing indicate a genetic causality?
Thank you all. This is really cool.
The red box is by your feet, Dr. Villela. It gives out a handout to the audience. Is it right by your feet there? It gives out
I Yeah, I
your hand.
clicked it. I said keep.
Yeah, that's true, Electra. Definitions of different conditions have certainly changed. We now talk about neurodivergence, and that's sort of a new thing. I don't think the existence of it is not new, but the naming of it is new.